I work with McGraw Hill. McGraw Hill is sponsoring the event for Tom's book launch, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of background about what we're doing, and then turn it over to Tom for a conversation. So, my role at McGraw Hill is in product management, and what that means is I spend a lot of time talking to university and college instructors about content and what content we should be publishing in the next 3 to 5 years, be that print or digital. And it's not so much just what content people want, but also what content people are willing to pay for. And that has become something really interesting over the last couple of years, right? So we live in a world of free content, okay? So everybody is spending a ton of their time on the internet looking at content from all different sources. And then you go to a cocktail party and you recite one of the pieces of content that you've learned online about, how the Toronto rental market is going to drop, until your roommate's cousin Brad says, "Where'd you learn that? The internet?" I read a little magazine called the New York Times, and it says otherwise. And you go, wow. So I guess my Snapchat newsfeed wasn't a place to learn about, real content, real articles. Like, interesting. You take a look at Spotify. Spotify has 200 million users around the world. 96 million of them pay for Spotify. So that $12 a week is spent for the exact same content that the other 104 million use for free, right? So you're paying entirely for how you interact with that content. And I find this model really interesting, right? And this is one of the things I was so excited about to take on Tom's project, which is it started checking the boxes of not only content that people want, but content that people will pay for, okay? So you're talking about the way that you interact with that content, which in music means you download it or you can use it on the subway or, you play without Wi-Fi. In higher education content, you're talking about curated. You're talking about a one-stop shop. You're talking about student-friendly language. You're not trying to open 50 different pages and gather bits and pieces from everywhere. You learn it in a curated step-by-step model, right? And as far as the content itself, what you're talking about is unique, accurate, up-to-date content, as opposed to me pulling from my Snapchat newsfeed or any other of the places that you could learn about this, right? For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Tom, Tom is an educator and business leader on multiple continents, and is currently running a digital marketing front-end, back-end, whole full-stop organization that basically takes your corporation from where they are to where they need to be in their digital future, along with his partner Lee, who is also in the crowd. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom to have a little chat about the future of digital and education.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks everyone for coming. And big thank you to Kevin and McGraw Hill for providing some amazing, yummy food and drinks, and also obviously to Digifest, George Brown for helping us pull all of this together and inviting us to take part. So I've got the thanks out of the way because I'll forget at the end. So we're going to have hopefully quite an entertaining sort of whistle-stop investigation in digital education. And there's an interactive bit at the beginning, so if you're holding food and things like that, be careful. This is the talk. Kevin mentioned that, as well as being an educator, I have a digital business with my co-founder Lee, who's over the back there. And this is our little aeroplane. When we set up a few years back, it was just the two of us in this little plane. And we're now kind of not quite a jumbo jet, but we're a bit bigger. The other thing I want to do is dedicate this talk to Kofi Ado, who's one of my graduate students who very sadly passed away in New York unexpectedly last week. He was one of my graduate students in the UK at the Royal College of Art, and he helped me do an incredible project in Ghana. He was Ghanaian. So if anyone wants to make a donation, the fundraiser there is to help his family with, all the things that his mum and his wife and kids have to deal with. I also want to honour and thank the Huron-Wendat Nation, Métis Nation of Ontario, Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, Scugog Island First Nation, Six Nations of the Grand River, as the traditional inhabitants of the lands of the City of Toronto and surrounding areas. Okay, so about me, if you've seen any of the online materials or you've been to the book's website, you probably know plenty enough about me. I guess I put a few projects up here through my career. It's been quite diverse, and I began as an engineer, electronic engineer, studied in Edinburgh in the UK, worked in computing, set up a design agency. We did architecture, we did digital events and media for buildings initially, and gradually kind of migrated more and more into the digital space. So I had one foot in physical for a long time. Large screen displays, you can see down in the bottom left, that's a giant display. It was part of a project we did with an artist, and that's at Facebook in Toronto. And has anyone been on the London Eye in the UK? Yeah? You like it? So I was a junior designer on the pods and the boarding, so I've only been on it like 3 or 4 times, but it was a very exciting project. So and the top right, you can see a Cray supercomputer. I think that was my first job when I graduated, working at Cray in the UK, but it's a US company. They made the world's fastest computers. That computer cost $10 million and was as fast as a first-generation iPad. So I was working on that in 1989. So at the time, that seemed quick, yeah? But things have moved on. The bottom right, you can see that's our Six Trends website. So a lot of color, a lot of fun, which is quite typical of the sort of work we tend to do. So enough about me. Let's talk about you. So generations. Now, you might be wondering which of these generations you are, but I can tell you, I don't think anyone in the audience is Gen Z. You're kind of like 18 or under, pretty much. I think many of you are millennials. I apparently am at the beginning or end, whichever way you look at it, of Generation X, and baby boomers are kind of 55 plus. Gen Zs now are in a majority, which is kind of interesting, because you don't tend to think of that. All the millennials, the hated millennials, like every generation hates the next generation. The millennials can now hate the Gen Zs as look out for your jobs. A few shifts in generations and some of the trends. Well, first off, retirement age is going up, 70 plus. What does that mean for us? Well, one thing, Gen Zs are expected to have 2 or 3 careers, like different careers, during that time, because they're going to be working for so long. Life expectancy of women is going to be nudging 94, men 86. So that's about 10% higher life expectancy by 2050. The other thing that's kind of fun fact, millennials, being a millennial, growing up with tech doesn't mean understanding it, and this is like a lovely figure. 58% of millennials have poor skills solving problems with technology, okay? So although we grow up increasingly with this stuff, just because it's there doesn't mean that we're all comfortable using it and can figure it out. Some of it is a real pain. What does this also mean is, well, look out for continuous learning, because in the good old days, you go to university or college, get your diploma, your degree, and get a job, and then kind of that's it. The pace in digital the pace of change is so fast now that experts are suggesting that going back to school every 5 to 7 years would be a good idea. Great for George Brown, great for online programs, great for anybody doing training, not so great if you've got to pay for that out of pocket. And that's the other bad statistic, is that the amount of investment in staff training and professional development that organizations are prepared to pay is going down just as the demands go up. So a lot of that has to come from the individual. Occasionally you come across an organization which considers itself to be a learning organization, and they really are like trailblazing in this situation. You might not believe that. You might think that's crazy. You can do it all online. Go to the internet. But give you a good example, the book, which is a couple of copies sitting down here. There are only 2 copies in existence at the moment. 40% of the tools, techniques, and best practice, there you go, shiny cover, Thank you, Kevin. 40% of those tools and techniques didn't exist when I started writing the book 7 years ago. And I should say I never started writing a book, really. I was producing course notes for some of the digital courses that we were putting together because nobody else would. And it evolved into a book. Would you hire somebody that only knew 60% of what they should be doing? Now, again, in the old days, you might take someone as an apprentice, but companies now, the kind of dilemma in Toronto, for example, which has seen phenomenal growth in demand for digital jobs as the digital economy has grown. It's due to overtake automotive as the main economy in Ontario within the next couple of years, is those companies would rather leave a vacancy than hire someone who doesn't have the full skill set. So it's still a struggle, even if you've got those qualifications. So we're going to do a little quiz. This is the exercise to kind of prove a point. So you all need to stand up if you can. Sorry about this. And I want you to sit down if you believe that the technology I show you is less than 7 years old. Okay, so the first one, a chatbot. If you believe that's less than 7 years old, have a seat. Okay. One. Okay, one taker. Make yourself at home. 1966, Eliza. Okay, sit down if you think HTML is more than 7 years old. Okay, I think Steve just wants to see. 1991. JavaScript, less than 7. 1995. Okay, the quiz is going to continue for a little while. We're going to get our way through this. A neural net, whatever that is. 1943. A convolutional neural network. I'm just trying to rub in the fact that I know loads. After 7 years, 1980, an API. 2000. Okay, we've got some hardcore standards here. Let's see how it goes this time. Virtual reality, less than 7 years. 1968, the first virtual reality system. Human-centered design. 1989. Web workers. Okay, that's very technical. 2010. And I think this might be the last one. E-commerce? No? There's a few pros here. 1991. Bitcoin. 2009. Oh, Kevin, we got you. In-game location-based lures. Well, wait for it. In-game location-based lures. Used in Pokemon. Go. 2016. Sorry. So we got you all. Okay, so everybody in this room has got at least one thing to learn from the book. The in-game location-based lures, if you don't have a teenage daughter or son and you're not into Pokemon, that basically allowed people like McDonald's to pay the company to put lures into the game to encourage people to go into the McDonald's restaurant where they would catch cool Pokemon. Very cool technology, and it was invented within the Pokemon Go system. Okay, so I guess the message there is, although technology and theory can go back a long time, like the implementations, the tools, techniques, they evolve constantly. And that change is where there's a dilemma when it comes to making sure that students or people in the workplace are constantly appraised and practiced in those techniques. I learned computer programming decades ago, but I'm still constantly having to go to new resources in order to figure out what to do with some of the new programming techniques. And as I say, potentially very good for universities and colleges because they're going to get second wave, third wave, fourth wave of students. Okay, so did anyone know that this week was the 25th anniversary of the web? Only 25, yeah? So that makes it a millennial. I pulled up a few of the first pages ever, just for fun. This was Google, pretty cool graphics. Apple, very minimal, very zen. And the Apple iPhone there, the first one, a bit chunky, needs to go on a bit of a diet, chunky guy. LinkedIn, well, that hasn't changed very much. The Facebook, and Twitter, 2006. This is my favorite, Space Jam, put up by Warner Brothers for the groovy spoof movie, spacejam.com. And amazingly, you can go to this. They haven't changed it since 1996. It's still got these incredible graphics. So what's been going on behind the scenes during that period is like first changing approaches to user interface, user experience, and changing technology. And this diagram here shows how that timeline has happened from about 1991 to present day. We've gone from kind of fixed websites through to MDOT, which like were different websites for different devices, although there weren't that many devices in those days, to Fluid, which became responsive, and you'll be familiar with that, which is on the big screen, you get tons of content, and then on the small screen, everything gets squished down, and usually you get a huge, long scroll. Through to progressive web apps, which are really web apps that are trying to be apps, but they're websites, and scalable web design. And this is kind of the current thinking. The web app is one of my own personal specialities, and the book puts a lot of emphasis on this, deriving the functionality of an app, even being able to work offline, doing technical things like lazy loading, which means that it doesn't burn through your data unless you're actually looking at stuff, rather like when you're scrolling through your social media. Single URL. We tend to go for all the page management going through JavaScript, and you might be using a framework. You could be using all these things like React, whatever you like, but at the end of it, there's JavaScript doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And vector rich, you've probably seen like how everything is now flat design. All the graphics are looking like, unless they're deliberately retro, the pixel has almost vanished. And a lot of integrations across social media, with the exception of annoying LinkedIn, who keep removing a lot of the API facilities. We practice what we preach. Our own website has a lot of this going on, and what we're starting to see is more, I'll get it to click, click, click. There we go. More kind of, in a way, it's kind of a return to what we were seeing before the demise of Flash, which is more kind of animations, more engagement, more interactions, more vibrancy, and less of, kind of cookie cutter solutions, I guess. As our little aeroplane makes an appearance again. Again, the plumbing that makes these things possible is really like advanced now and also simple to use, which is why I've been able to put it in a book. Connectivity, number one, APIs. The cloud is like, everywhere obviously now. Software as solutions, like big. Real-time web. These diagrams are showing just some of the applications that you can use the API to connect them together, knit them together, so your finance system in your business can connect with your marketing system and can connect with your social media, yada, 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 without you having to write really very much code at all. So that is one of the great boons. And the API, as you saw from that previous slide, it's invented in 2000. It was actually invented by Salesforce, who produced a client relationship management tool, and it's probably in there somewhere. They did it as a generous act, and everybody else eventually figured out that that was a good thing to do. The other big trend we're seeing, which it's been a slow burn, but it's a big technology, the Internet of Things, the real-time web. This is some of our work with AR. We kind of put AR, VR into this basket. Internet of Things is probably progressing much faster at the moment than things like VR. Most of it is invisible. You don't realize that a lot of your devices that are not computers and phones, like now increasingly things like your refrigerator, your car, have got one of the billions and billions of Internet of Things chipsets sitting there controlling stuff. And you could do some pretty groovy stuff. This is the project in the top right there we did for a coffee shop, which just puts your tweets into, or allows you to see tweets in your coffee, as long as you have a cappuccino, when you're in the cafe. Another element, and this is kind of the flip side, is when I'm in education inviting industry to advise, and now I'm kind of on the other side of the fence. I come to George Brown and advise David on his program as an industry person. Is industry like, yeah, you know, we're really at the cutting edge, but actually, I think that's true for the digital agencies providing a lot of solutions, but the businesses that are having to transform themselves to get up-to-date technology are really struggling. And you can see from this little donut that there's about over a third of businesses have no plans, and this is data from last year, no plans at all to instigate any digital transformation. So they're using old tools, techniques, terrible supply chain. You'll have come across these businesses with the frustration that your order is lost, or it's not delivered, or it takes 16 weeks for a sofa to come from Montreal, you know, et cetera, et cetera. They don't get any of the benefits of transformation, which are the 4 big points there. And it's predicted that a third of those businesses will not actually make the transition. They won't be here. So this is another kind of call to action, really, for programs, for organizations to really invest in the training, because this figure can be improved dramatically by people taking up digital training and know-how. What does this mean for teaching? Well, change in a subject is very frustrating. If you're teaching philosophy, you can pretty much get away with the same textbooks that were being used like 40, 50 years ago. Probably need a little thing to do with authenticity in North America these days, or the US at any rate. But generally speaking, the subject is like relatively static. So in the digital, it's really important that tools are available to allow the instructors to cope, because they cannot be the body of knowledge and wisdom that they once were in other slow-moving subjects. There's a whole load of new pedagogies, which are you teaching, which add to the workload. So there's multimodal learning, and Kevin and McGraw Hill have all sorts of different ways that you can access information. Experiential learning, team working, multidisciplinary collaborations, work with industry. And I would say students now are really demanding way more than they were, like, say, 10 years ago. They consider themselves to be customers. As an educator, I've always been a little bit uncomfortable with that notion, because somehow it doesn't really fit in with some pedagogical principles. But the long and short of it is those students are very demanding. They expect very professional, high-quality service. A big part of this as well is new methods, workflow, and process. And I think that when I was working at OCAD University setting up new programs, in fact, I see Sarah Diamond, President Sarah has just arrived from OCAD, that it wasn't just about skills. It was about thought leadership and, like, how do you actually do things different? So a lot of work on methods, process, and workflow. Those things that basically give the student graduating an opportunity to go into the management streams, to go into the decision-making streams, as opposed to just producing output assets for other people. And one of the big parts of that is user experience design, and there's lots of different flavors when people are defining user experience. To me, it sits, and this is my pie chart or Venn diagram, it sits at the core, the intersection of visual design, business case, and product or service. And that UX has a lot of fantastic tools, and you can see some of them on the right. You'll have heard of things like focus groups and wireframes and paper prototyping probably, but the user experience design for me is if it's not at that intersection for a particular project, then the project is going to be in trouble. And you could do something that looks great, but there's no business case for it. So why do it? Yeah, unless it's like a hobby project or you have other reasons. This diagram is really bad, I apologize. But another element, on the technical front, there's loads and loads of collaborative working and distributed working techniques. You'll probably have heard of Agile, that's just one of them. And they are all really revolving around the same thing. This curve, which is based on research data, is saying one thing, which is the longer you leave it to fix something during a project development, the more it's going to cost you, and the cost goes up exponentially. So all of the traditional techniques, like, for example, traditional acceptance testing at the end of a project, happen right up on the curve. The early ones, like, for example, embedding your client or customer in the team right at the beginning, because that basically stops the bad stuff from happening, or if it does, it's caught really early on. So kind of common sense, yeah? That's how you'd do a lot of other things. But in digital, things got bloated. There's a tragic history of massive, massive projects that got out of control, that failed, often funded by government, often funded by managers who don't understand the details. So I think like OCAD, I know George Brown, and a number of other programs, Royal College of Art are really putting a lot of emphasis in like making sure that people understand how to deal with these kind of complex processes. For my own part, over the last few years, I've been playing around with my own framework, which I do cover in the book, and I've called it the 7 Deadly Wins, which is a fun kind of title, but it really comes out of my understanding and kind of evolution with clients on the notion of developing something versus deploying it, and making sure that you can kind of shift things like sliding doors between the development and the deployment without it turning into like total chaos. Because I've seen a lot of projects where everything is endlessly not finished and messy. And some clients, by the way, they don't like things like Agile because it's like it's difficult to write a proposal and just follow it in a sequential way. So this technique or framework is based on, well, developing is about the kind of 4 loops of iteration there: technology, look and feel, function, and design. In this sense, I mean kind of not just the design of the product, but also kind of the architectural design of the system. Looping around, creativity at the core, and I think that's one of the reasons why design colleges and universities have been more interesting to me in leading the field with digital than some of the traditional universities who are coming at it from a computer science point of view, because the creativity, to me, needs to be at the core there. To sliding it into deployment, which is about 2 things: the users, the use, and the earning. Like, it's got to bring either value or it's got to earn cash, dollars, filthy lucre, one way or another. And that loop is, again, iterative, experimenting, playing, looking at the data, why isn't it working, and then sliding it back into development. And this kind of endless shuffle. The 7 Deadly Wins, because there's 7 components to this, basically. And we have an outline which we found project managers, clients can understand. It's simple, and it doesn't add an overhead to users. And we've been trying that with students as well, and students like it. When you're doing a year-long project as a student for the first time, that can be a massively overwhelming task. The other thing is the student is increasingly the innovator. That means that their project is kind of the business. And we're seeing so many students now setting up projects that are visible in the public domain during their undergraduate or graduate studies or diplomas. And that's great, because it means they are self-employed by the time they leave. This is the Eric Ries's, from his Lean Startup book. This is his pyramid of like stability, I suppose, which is the thought leadership is about making sure that you've got a really robust vision. It can evolve, but it shouldn't really change dramatically. Strategy for like how you're going to get that vision to deliver does evolve, and the significant changes of product and service which can keep being optimized and keep evolving. And that gives larger projects which have an organic life, a little bit of a foundation and a kind of anchor. If you're on a project and the vision keeps changing, or the visionary isn't very visionary, then, and there's quite a few leaders in the Western world at the moment like that, then things just become like chaotic. This, to me, has introduced the notion of the everything student. When I get my breakfast in the mornings, I sometimes choose the everything bagel, which I quite like. I never quite know what's in it, because in the UK they don't have them, but in Canada they're yummy. It's not like a mishmash. It is quite tasty in its own right. And I think what I've been seeing is the signs with the universities and colleges I've been involved in, that the everything student is really somebody who's coming in with, there is a particular discipline that they're interested in, but for them to really leverage value for themselves and for that discipline, they do have to pick up and understand a number of kind of subsidiary skills around that and even disciplines before they can really get useful. And the X-shaped designer was something we were thinking of at OCAD University, where people were reaching into art, design, enterprise, and science. We've been finding some of the other universities, like University of Gloucestershire, for example, that maybe this is no surprise, but when you put together 3 or 4 different students from different degree classes into a digital course, that you get phenomenal results compared with allegedly a multidisciplinary course that only has user experience designers in it, for example. The other thing, coming on to that notion of people want great quality, I love that sign at the top, which is from in fact, it's from Lee's school. Which school is it? Okay, so you can, we went to their 100th anniversary and one of the kids had put this on the wall, and I think it's really important because everything's got to be interesting as well. In the classroom now, we're competing with YouTube and we're competing with Netflix. It's not simply a question of everybody sitting there and listening because we're more important. It doesn't work that way anymore. Another element, this I think is really interesting as well, is like, well, what's happening in the workplace? When I was at TVO, we delivered training, digital training to, when I was working at OCAD, we delivered digital training to TVO broadcasting at a range of levels. And one of the, well, first it's very interesting that TVO wanted to do that, so it's one of the few organizations that would deliver that across its team, but vertically as well as horizontally. But one of the blobs in there is really important, and I think I'm going to see more of that in academia as well. The second one, initial participant profiling, which we did online. So that's not happening much at the moment. When a program or a course is available, it's one size fits all. It's like the student takes it, there might be a little bit of choice about assignments, but generally everyone has to fit into it. With the profiling, and particularly with the online e-learning, you can now say, well, yeah, maybe we could break this up into 20 components, and if somebody already knows something, they could choose another part. You could give somebody a more interesting assignment because of what you know about them. That's something that the online platforms are really, really good at. So we see more of that profiling, like why learn something again that you already know? So a lot of those thoughts buzzing around in my head when I started work on the book. As I say, it was originally just course notes, and it got bigger and bigger. Students kept asking for it, so I carried on writing it. And then I thought I'd do it as a website, and then I decided I didn't know enough about the cutting-edge technology to do the website, so it became a Word document, and now it's about to be published, both as an e-book and a physical book. What's in it? Literally 7 years of work, informed by a lot of university work courses, 221,000 words, according to Word, 1.4 million characters, a lot of diagrams, 2,000 code examples online. That's really important because the code is kind of the living, breathing element. It's the respiratory system of this book. The book can be chopped up and diced and sliced and exist in lots of different media, but the code is code, and that doesn't change. All available. Lots of sections rewritten many times. Like 7 years ago, a lot of the tech was different. As I said, I've kind of been back to college a number of times in order to just do this in a sense. And the last page, I got asked this, I think, Kevin, you asked me the other day. The last page was written a month ago. It wasn't the last page in the book. It's like about 2/3 of the way through. And I had to scramble to get it in because Google had just released an API letting you run neural nets for image recognition on your browser or on your phone, which was super cool and really easy to use. So I had to put that in. It's JavaScript for everything. If you're familiar with the web landscape, JavaScript has been around since Netscape invented it. It was written in 10 days, the first version, as a kind of semi-answer to some competing alternatives that some of the other competitors were putting together. We found, I kind of bet the farm when I was at OCAD on JavaScript being the language that everyone should know. And I kind of won that bet. It's lucky. At the time it's being used for web. You can now use it, and we use it in our business for Internet of Things, for physical computing devices. You can use it for the back end with Node.js and all sorts of other tools. So it's kind of become the everything language. And there's some other cool ones that the book does touch on, but most of it's JavaScript. And the unreadable code there, which is about 70 lines, just to sort of show off the back end. Well, this is actually front and back end. This is a little bit of code to create a chat room in like 70 lines with JavaScript and Node.js, basically. It's like a dream, because if you had to do that with old languages like PHP, you know, that would have been like 1,200, 1,500 lines. So it's concise as well. Right. So we can take questions, conversation. You're very welcome to disagree with me. I'm armed with loads and loads of pages of knowledge to like refute any disagreements, but I love dialogue. And there is, I think, one of the important things about this book, I wanted to inject flavor. Like, because as an instructor, I really wrote this book because I couldn't find any others. And I bought about 25 books, and I'm very bad with books. I was marking them up, tearing out chapters to try and create a composite of what I wanted, and it still wasn't what I wanted. So I like textbooks to have some flavor and some opinion in them. So this one does. Somebody asked me what the last page was. I've forgotten. Maybe that was you as well. I'm not sure. Might have been Kevin. Should I spoil the last page? It's like a novel. I'm going to spoil the last page. Okay. Well, there you go. It's #9749, which is one of the ISO characters for a coffee cup. And the cool thing about this is that until a few years ago, if you used it on different devices, you'd get all sorts of random icons, but now they're kind of working together. So although the coffee cup looks quite different on an Android compared with iOS, compared with well, if anyone's still got a Windows phone, Microsoft phone, at least it is a coffee cup. So I think I wrote that, and then I had a cup of coffee because I thought the book was finished about a year ago, before copyright and various other things. And I think I'll end on a quote which I love, because in the end, there's a mass of knowledge that is like the kind of, I guess, the substance, the foundation to all the amazing things that we're seeing in digital now. But it doesn't matter to your users, to your consumers. Like, they don't need to understand it. And in fact, the magic of it really comes from not understanding it. And I think Arthur C. Clarke really hit it. I'm not sure what kind of technologies he was talking about in 1961. It's probably things like the Magimix food blender or something. But it's, well, I guess he did invent satellites, so he was a pretty deep thinker. And I think that's it. My last little slide. There's this book is a virtual production at the moment until early June. But there's a book website. If you want to see anything, content, little film clips and things like that, there's tons on that, which is on the QR code is the same, fullstackplaybook.com. McGraw Hill very kindly offering 10% discounts as well. You just have to use a code. And I think that's it. Yeah, thank you very much. Wow.
We actually have a full Stack Web App Playbook cake. Now, the interesting thing is when we asked the cake designer to make a keyboard, they put a piano keyboard, so this talks a lot to the perception
I think it's better like that.
Words, but so if everyone can stay for some cake, but maybe you can make the first cut into your book.
Wow, I'd love to.
You think that we're going to do it?
Going through all the pages. Maybe I should start over here. Where do I begin a book?
Yay!
There we go. Thank you. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions. Yeah, go for it. Do you want to tell us who you are? It's like nice to know.
I'm an engineer, not an electrical engineer, but I've been for a number of years getting into coding and web development stuff. And when I started, I had to learn HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Now, 20 years later, tools like web
No, I think it is. I'd be interested for other people's comments as well on that. Really, so yeah, there's a lot of tools, a lot of frameworks that are layering on top of some of the lower level techniques and technologies. And I think that's always been the case. I mean, it's there aren't many people who code using a text editor anymore. Yeah, and you know, I had a client who wanted to know the price, how much code costs per line. And that was a really interesting exercise because actually the price varies massively depending on whether you use other people's libraries or not, or whether you have your own libraries. So agencies like ours, we tend to build up our own frameworks and libraries over time. So we have our own stuff, and you know, if you're the originator, then you can generally stay ahead and do cooler stuff than other people who are having to rely on third-party tools that are kind of black boxes. But having said that, I think there's space for all of it. Like the notion that someone with no coding skills can set some cool website up in WordPress has been currency for a long time. And I think about 60% of the world's websites are sitting on WordPress. But WordPress itself is a ton of ancient PHP that's kind of like clunking away. It's like got massive security issues. And if you want to take one of those kind of cookie cutter websites and make it extraordinary, then you start to get into real problems. And I think, to me, that's like, in some ways, take fashion industry, you've got ready to wear, you might go to TJ Maxx to get your, you know, cool semi-designer stuff, and then you've got like the kind of haute couture, which is like hand-constructed, tailor-made. For us, I guess we're kind of in between haute couture and pret-a-porter, which is like, we try and bring affordable, cool technologies to the client, to the customer. We're benefiting as well from the tools, but the tools that we use tend to be more, they're not like, you know, they're not consumer tools, yeah, they're professional tools. And so what are universities doing about that? Well, in fact, my colleague Demi at the back there, who's got an amazing agency, just told me there's a room here with 50 high-end Mac server pros or whatever sitting there, yeah? Probably you will be struggling to find an agency that has that level of hardware in its office. So I think education is doing its bit to try and get on top of this stuff. It's, in a way, I always think a lot of the issues could go back to the demise of Flash, because the one thing that Flash did was gave designers a timeline-based creative tool. And in many ways, the golden age of visual design for web was like when Flash was at its peak. You could do a lot of that now, but you have to resort to coding. And so a lot of designers' heads explode at that point. What I'm really pleased to see is there's more and more tools coming in back now, which turn the graphics, the visuals, the animation into code, into websites without that pain. And that's applying to wireframing, which is increasingly the distinction between a wireframe and an actual prototype and an actual production website is starting to blur. That will continue. But there's always going to be a need for, you know, a few smarty pants, a few smart agencies to be able to go in and actually like do the lowest level. But I mean, having said that, JavaScript, it's not low level. I mean, you go several levels lower before you get to the machinery that actually drives the web. Yeah. More questions? Oh, okay, we'll go for you then, Ryan. Yeah.
You told something about student profiling for this providing of the right courses for students, but don't you think there's a risk that if students, individuals don't fit certain profiles while they still really want to learn something or participate in something, they kind of push out and give them the chance to develop because they don't fit the profile?
Yeah, so, I mean, definitely if you're profiling in order to decide whether or not to let people onto your course or your program or into your higher education establishment, then absolutely, that's like very dangerous. And that's happening already on the web, for example, with credit, with banks. Like, if you're anything unusual, it's easier for them just to like boot you out of the system than to take a risk. There's no bank manager to kind of eyeball you and, you know, maybe have a conversation and find out that, you know, maybe there are some good personal reasons why your data doesn't add up. I think the profiling that we were investigating and using was much more about helping you to, well, firstly, like, what do you need to learn and what do you want to learn, and helping make sure that if you take a course, you chop it up into pieces, you can get your own kind of customized set of pieces. And to me, it's just a question of like atomizing the content. We have a very kind of fixed notion of what a course is. OCAD was quite revolutionary in recent years when it like changed things like course lengths and you know, the way in which you could earn money for taking an internship, which also earned you credits and things like that. That's all very radical, but the next stage really is to like, well, break stuff down even further and allow people to assemble credits in all sorts of interesting different ways. And it would drive a registrar insane trying to do the customized planning for several thousand students, but a computer can do that really quickly, and like AI in particular. Yeah. Ryan.
Okay, so having been in web development, I do understand a little bit of this, not to the complexity that you do, obviously, but I'm going to ask a basic question, but yet complex at the same time. So, given it's the 25th year anniversary of the internet, and having you worked through it over the last how many years you've done, where do you see the internet and web development and web applications over the next 25 years?
Super good question. So I think at the moment, like, the jury's out a little bit on this, because there's kind of one camp that is saying it's going to be hearables, it's going to be AI, it's going to be conversation-based. There's another camp that's saying, well, you know, that's fine, but we still have books, yeah? And the CD and the DVD didn't like destroy the book. I think it's going to be a bit of both. I mean, to me, I think the visual interface is not going to vanish. It's still important to us. We are very visual creatures. Like, our eyeballs are the most powerful developed sense that we have. I had a brain scan a few years ago, and I was amazed to see that about a third of my cranium was full of eyeball and optic nerve. Yeah, so it's like pretty important sense. But on the other hand, there are like tons and tons of situations where a visual display is like inappropriate, and I think that is that's why, for example, VR is being very heavily adopted in things like warehouses, where when you're picking product, say at Amazon, it's very dangerous to be looking at some kind of tablet or template. A heads-up display makes a lot more sense. I think, like, with inclusive design, that's really important. I think we're getting, and one of the things that you don't really see with those figures about aging is that we're all going to be living longer, but like, it doesn't stop you getting infirm. So the proportion of the population that need assisted tools is going to grow massively. And that, I mean, we have a project that we're just putting together at the moment for dementia assistance. Well, I'm sorry to say, but like most of you in the room are probably going to be suffer tremendously from dementia before you actually get a life-threatening illness. So all of that assistance. So I think the hearables, the voice recognition is now phenomenal. I mean, the breakthrough point was actually achieved by Samsung, ahead of Google, by getting voice recognition accuracy that's like 0.1% higher than humans can achieve. So, as you know, we don't always understand each other, particularly different cultures, but that does mean that the machine learning, the AI, kind of invisible interface, that movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, that kind of scenario is not vanishing. But I do not think that the user interface design, user experience design is going to vanish because of that. We'll still probably be tapping on something like a phone in years to come. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Kevin.
No, you know what? My thoughts are so much lower level that I would rather keep to myself. But I think this has been spectacular. Thank you so much for everybody's engagement. I mean, it's been a big takeaway for me watching Tom work on the project and working alongside him for little pieces here. Just how much goes into this. When he submitted the last page,
I was told it was the last page about 10 times before that, so I have no idea when the real last page is coming. I hope I've seen it. Fingers crossed. Because if I have, then in about 3 weeks, Tom will be a published author. And when you're considering your lifelong learning, be that as a student at GBC or student at OCAD or someone in industry or anywhere else in your life, I think this is a really suitable tool to help you kind of continue that learning as you move forward.
Thank you. Yeah. So, well, thanks, Kevin, for making it possible. And please, enjoy the hospitality offered by McGraw Hill. There's now cake as well, amongst other luxuries. So do enjoy. Thank you. Yeah. That's great.